The courtroom was so silent you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Everyone, the jury, the press, even the bailiff, was staring at Evelyn Pierce. For 3 weeks, her ex-husband, Silas, had painted her as unstable, an alcoholic, and a danger to their children. He had the best lawyers money could buy, and they had torn her life apart, piece by piece. Evelyn hadn't said a word. She sat there, pale and trembling, looking at her hands. Everyone thought she had given up. Everyone thought she was broken. But then, Judge O'Connor leaned forward, adjusted his glasses, and asked one simple, unexpected question that didn't just change the verdict. It burned Silas Sterling's entire empire to the ground. This is the story of how silence can be the loudest scream. The air in Courtroom 4B of the Superior Court of California was thick, recycled, and smelled faintly of floor wax and desperate anxiety. To the casual observer, the case of Sterling versus Sterling was a foregone conclusion. On one side sat Silas Sterling, the golden boy of Silicon Valley venture capital, a man whose smile had graced the cover of Forbes and whose handshake had sealed billion-dollar mergers. He looked the part of the aggrieved father, an immaculate charcoal Tom Ford suit, a posture of weary dignity, and a gaze that conveyed nothing but concern for his allegedly erratic wife. On the other side sat Evelyn. Evelyn Pierce looked nothing like the vibrant, sharp-witted interior designer she had been when she met Silas 10 years ago in a gallery in San Francisco. Today, she looked like a ghost. Her blouse was a muted beige that washed out her complexion. Her hair, usually a cascade of chestnut waves, was pulled back into a severe, fraying bun. She sat with her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white, resembling polished marble. For 12 days of testimony, she had remained virtually catatonic. "She's doing it again," whispered a reporter from the San Jose Mercury News in the back row, scribbling furiously, just staring at the table. "It's like she's heavily medicated." That was exactly what Silas wanted them to think. His lead attorney, Preston Gage, a man known in legal circles as the Thresher for his ability to separate witnesses from their credibility, had spent the morning session meticulously dismantling Evelyn's character. He had introduced Exhibit G, a wine receipt from a liquor store in Palo Alto. Exhibit H, a grainy photo of Evelyn arguing with a valet at a charity gala 3 years ago. "Mrs. Sterling has a history of public outbursts," Gage had boomed, pacing in front of the jury box. "She has a history of instability. And now, faced with the consequences of her actions, she offers the court nothing but silence. A silence, ladies and gentlemen, that speaks louder than any defense." Silas watched his ex-wife from the corner of his eye. He kept his face neutral, a mask of sad resignation. But internally, he was gloating. It had cost him $4 million in legal fees and private investigators to orchestrate this moment. He had gaslit her for years, moved assets into offshore accounts in the Caymans under the shell company Apex Horizon, and slowly isolated her from her friends. He knew Evelyn better than anyone. He knew she hated confrontation. He knew that when she was overwhelmed, she didn't fight. She froze. He was banking on that freeze. "Mrs. Sterling!" Judge O'Connor's voice rumbled from the bench. The judge was a man in his late 60s, with bushy grey eyebrows and a reputation for having zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. He looked at Evelyn over the rim of his spectacles. "Your counsel has indicated you wish to take the stand. Is that correct?" Evelyn's lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named Selena Jenkins, who looked overworked and under-caffeinated, touched Evelyn's arm gently. Evelyn flinched. It was a micro-movement, barely visible, but Silas saw it. Good, Silas thought. She's terrified. Evelyn stood up. Her legs were shaky. She walked to the witness box as if walking to the gallows. She took the oath in a voice so quiet the court reporter had to ask her to repeat it. "I do," she whispered. She sat down. Preston Gage approached her like a shark smelling blood in the water. He didn't start with the heavy accusations. He started with the basics, lulling her into a rhythm before the kill. "Mrs. Sterling, is it true that on the night of November 14th, you left your children, Sophie and Liam, alone in the house for 3 hours?" Evelyn looked at Silas. Silas offered her a tiny, barely perceptible nod, a reminder of the threat he had whispered to her in the hallway 2 months ago. "If you fight me, Evie, I will make sure the world thinks you're crazy. You'll never see the kids again." Evelyn looked back at Gage. "No," she said softly. "No?" Gage feigned surprise. "We have the nanny's testimony stating she arrived at 10:00 p.m. and found the house empty. Are you calling Ms. Davina Clark a liar?" "I was—" Evelyn's voice cracked. "I was in the garage. The door was jammed." "In the garage," Gage repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "For 3 hours, without your phone, which records show was pinging off a tower near the Golden Gate Bridge." Evelyn closed her eyes. It was a lie. Silas had taken her phone that night. He had driven it to the bridge while she was locked in the garage, pounding on the door until her hands bled. But she had no proof. Just like she had no proof about the bruises he left where clothes covered them, or the psychological torment of him hiding her keys, her wallet, her medication. I can't explain the phone," Evelyn murmured. "Of course you can't," Gage said, turning his back on her to address the jury. "Because you weren't home, were you? You were out, unstable, negligent." The gallery murmured. Silas allowed a single tear to trace down his cheek. It was a masterclass in manipulation. But Evelyn wasn't looking at Gage anymore. She was looking at the judge, and for the first time in 3 weeks, there was something in her eyes other than fear. It was a spark, a tiny, dangerous ember of something cold and hard. She realized then that Silas wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to erase her. And if she was going to be erased, she might as well leave a mark. To understand why the courtroom was so heavily stacked against Evelyn, one had to understand Silas Sterling. Silas wasn't just rich. He was influential in a way that terrified people. He sat on the board of the San Francisco General Hospital. He was a donor to the Police Benevolent Association. He played golf with senators at the Olympic Club. He had spent 10 years curating an image of the perfect modern man, sensitive but strong, wealthy but philanthropic. But the real Silas was a creature of meticulous calculation. Flashback to 6 months prior. The divorce had just been filed. Silas sat in his office on the top floor of the Salesforce Tower, looking out over the fog rolling in over the bay. Across from him sat his fixer, a man named Elias Vane. Vane wasn't a lawyer, he was a cleaner of reputations. "She found the notebook, Elias," Silas said, swirling a glass of 18-year-old scotch. Vane, a man with a face like a crumpled road map, didn't blink. "The red ledger?" "Yes." She saw the transactions for Project Chimera. She knows about the payoffs to the city council regarding the zoning for the waterfront development. "That's a problem," Vane said. "If that gets out, you're not just losing the kids, Silas. You're going to federal prison for bribery and racketeering." Silas took a sip. She didn't take it. She just saw it. "I caught her in the study. I managed to swap it out before she could snap a photo. But she knows. She's going to use it in the divorce." "Not if she has no credibility," Vane said smoothly. "We don't need to kill her, Silas. We just need to kill her voice. We need to make her radioactive. By the time she tries to tell anyone about a red ledger or bribery, She needs to look so unhinged that it sounds like a conspiracy theory from a madwoman. How? Gaslighting is slow, Vane said. We need shock and awe. We plant the alcohol bottles. We pay off the nanny, Davina. We doctor the digital footprint. We make her miss appointments. We make her look exhausted in public. We provoke her in public places where there are cameras. Then you stand back and look like the victim. Silas smiled. It was evil, and it was perfect. And it had worked. Back in the courtroom, Preston Gage was wrapping up his cross-examination. He had battered Evelyn for 2 hours. He had brought up her postpartum depression from 5 years ago and weaponized it. He had twisted her career failures, sabotaged by Silas behind the scenes, into evidence of laziness. Mrs. Sterling, Gage said, leaning on the railing of the witness box, invading her personal space. You claim you want custody of your children, yet you have no income. You have no home of your own, as you are currently staying in a motel. You have a documented history of mental fragility. Do you truly believe, in your heart of hearts, that you are the best parent for Sophie and Liam? The room went deadly quiet. This was the breaking point. This was where Evelyn was supposed to scream, to cry, to call Silas a liar. If she did, she looked unstable. If she stayed silent, she looked defeated. Silas leaned forward, his hands clasped, waiting for the explosion. Evelyn looked at Gage. Then she looked past him, locking eyes with Silas. I believe, Evelyn said, her voice steady for the first time, that a parent's worth isn't measured by their bank account, Mr. Gage. It is measured by their honesty. And my husband has a very expensive way of hiding the truth. Objection, Gage snapped. Non-responsive. Sustained, Judge O'Connor said, though he peered at Evelyn with renewed interest. Mrs. Sterling, please answer the question asked. I am the best parent, Evelyn said, because I am the only one who isn't playing a role. Silas' jaw tightened. She was going off script. She wasn't screaming. She was resolving. Gage sensed the shift. He decided to end it before she could garner any sympathy. No further questions, Your Honor. Evelyn remained in the chair. Her lawyer, Selina Jenkins, looked at her. Redirect? The judge asked. No, Your Honor, Jenkins said. She knew they had nothing. They had no physical evidence to counter the mountain of lies Silas had built. Very well, Judge O'Connor said. He looked at the clock. It was 3:45 p.m. You may step down, Mrs. Sterling. Evelyn moved to stand. Wait, the judge said. Evelyn froze. Silas froze. Judge O'Connor was shuffling through a stack of papers on his bench. He wasn't looking at the legal briefs. He was looking at a small, handwritten note that had been submitted into evidence days ago, almost as an afterthought, by Silas's own team to prove Evelyn's financial incompetence. It was a grocery list on the back of a bank deposit slip. The judge picked up the slip. He frowned. He tilted his head. Mrs. Sterling, the judge said, before you step down, I have one question. It's a bit unusual, but it pertains to Exhibit 44, this bank slip found in your vehicle. Silas felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. The bank slip. He had planted that to show she was overdrawing accounts. What could possibly be wrong with it? Yes, Your Honor, Evelyn asked. On the back of this slip, the judge said, squinting at the paper, there is a grocery list. Milk, eggs, bread. But there is also a date and a series of numbers scribbled in the margin. 10-14-22, 41-71-28, 74.060. The judge looked up. Mrs. Sterling, do you know what these numbers represent? Evelyn looked at the paper. She blinked. She genuinely didn't know. She hadn't written them. Silas had planted the slip. I don't know, Your Honor. I didn't write that. You didn't? The judge looked at Silas. Mr. Sterling, your counsel submitted this item. Did you write this? Gage stood up. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. It's scrap paper. It's not irrelevant, Judge O'Connor said, his voice dropping an octave, because 10/14/22 was the date my clerk filed a very specific, sealed warrant for a case involving offshore wire fraud. And those coordinates? 40.7128, 74.00060. That's not a grocery store, Mr. Gage. The judge took off his glasses. That is the exact geolocation of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just quiet anymore. It was heavy. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. But nobody, not even Evelyn, knew who was caught in it yet. Mrs. Sterling, the judge asked, why would the coordinates of the Federal Reserve be on a deposit slip in your car, written in handwriting that matches your husband's signature on his affidavit? Silas Sterling stood up, knocking his chair over. This is preposterous. But Evelyn saw it. She saw the panic in his eyes. The judge hadn't just found a grocery list. He had found the loose thread in the sweater. And he was about to pull. The crash of Silas Sterling's chair against the parquet floor echoed like a gunshot. For a man who prided himself on control, on being the calmest person in the room, this outburst was catastrophic. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, Judge O'Connor barked, banging his gavel. The sound cracked through the tension, waking everyone from their stupor. Preston Gage was already pulling at Silas's sleeve, his face a mask of frantic professionalism. Silas, sit. Sit down. You're damaging the narrative. Silas sank back into his chair, his chest heaving. He adjusted his tie, his fingers trembling slightly. He had made a mistake, a sloppy, arrogant mistake. When he had planted that deposit slip in Evelyn's car to frame her for financial irresponsibility, he had grabbed a piece of paper from his own desk, a scrap he had used to jot down notes during a call with his offshore banker in the Caymans. He hadn't realized the coordinates were on the back. He had been so focused on the insufficient funds stamp on the front that he ignored the damning evidence on the reverse. Evelyn was still in the witness box, staring at the judge. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't understand the full implications of the coordinates, but she understood one thing. The judge was looking at Silas with suspicion, not her. Your Honor, Gage said, his voice smooth as oil, trying to regain control. This is highly irregular. My client likely jotted down some notes, perhaps related to a business trip, on a scrap of paper that Mrs. Sterling later misappropriated. It has no bearing on her fitness as a mother. On the contrary, Mr. Gage, Judge O'Connor said, leaning back. The judge was a former prosecutor, a man who had spent 20 years chasing white-collar criminals before donning the robe. He knew the smell of rot when he caught a whiff of it. This court is determining the financial stability and moral character of both parents. If Mr. Sterling is conducting business that involves the Federal Reserve and sealed warrants, that is germane to the custody of these children. The judge turned to the bailiff. Seize Exhibit 44. I want it held for forensic handwriting analysis immediately. And I want the court reporter to note Mr. Sterling's outburst. Your Honor, Gage protested. Silence, O'Connor snapped. He looked at Evelyn. Mrs. Sterling, you may step down, but do not leave the building. Evelyn walked back to her table. Her legs felt stronger now. She sat next to Selina Jenkins, who was looking at her with wide, bewildered eyes. What just happened? Selina whispered. I think, Evelyn whispered back, a tremor of hope in her voice. Silas just tripped over his own ego. The court adjourned for a recess. As the gallery cleared out, reporters were already tapping furiously on their phones. Venture capitalist Silas Sterling, linked to Federal Reserve mystery in divorce court. The headline was writing itself. In the hallway, away from the cameras, Silas cornered Gage. His face was a shade of red that clashed with his expensive suit. "Fix this, Preston," Silas hissed. "Make that paper disappear." "I can't make evidence disappear from a judge's bench, Silas," Gage whispered harshly. "What is on that paper? Tell me the truth. I can't defend you if I'm blind." Silas looked around. The corridor was empty, save for a janitor pushing a mop bucket near the elevators. He lowered his voice. "It's nothing. Just some investment coordinates. It's a misunderstanding." "Coordinates for the Federal Reserve?" Gage asked, skeptical. "Silas, if the feds are looking at you—" "They aren't," Silas snapped, but his hands were sweating. They weren't looking at him yet. But the judge had mentioned a date, 10/14/22. That was the day Silas had moved $12 million of company funds into the Apex Horizon Shell account. He had done it through a wire transfer that routed through the NY Fed. If the judge dug into that specific date, he needed a distraction. He needed to nuke Evelyn's credibility so thoroughly that no one would care about a scrap of paper. Silas pulled out his phone. He texted Elias Vane. "Plan B. Now." 30 minutes later, the recess ended. The courtroom was buzzing with a different energy now. The press section was full. The judge's unexpected question had turned a mundane custody battle into a spectacle. Evelyn sat at her table, trying to stay calm. She felt eyes on her. Not the judgmental eyes from the morning, but curious eyes. Calculating eyes. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge O'Connor returned, his face grim. "Mr. Gage," the judge said, "call your next witness." Gage stood up. He looked confident again. Too confident. "The defense calls Davina Clark to the stand." Evelyn's stomach dropped. Davina was their former nanny, a young woman Evelyn had trusted with her children's lives, a woman Evelyn had treated like a younger sister. Davina walked in. She was 24, blonde, and dressed in a modest blue dress that made her look innocent and wholesome. She avoided Evelyn's gaze entirely as she took the stand. "Miss Clark," Gage began, "how long were you employed by the Sterlings?" 2 years, Davina said. Her voice was small, shaky. "And during that time, did you witness Mrs. Sterling's behavior with the children?" "Yes." "Describe it for the court." Davina took a deep breath. "At first it was fine, but about a year ago, Evelyn started changing. She would disappear for hours. I'd find bottles of wine hidden in the laundry hampers. Sometimes," Davina started to cry, "sometimes she would forget to pick Sophie up from school. I'd have to go get her." Evelyn gasped. "That's a lie," she cried out. "I never missed a pickup. Never." "Order," the judge warned. Gage smirked. "Miss Clark, did you ever see Mrs. Sterling become violent?" Davina nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes. One night, about 3 months ago. I came downstairs and Evelyn was screaming at Liam. He's only 4. She was shaking him. She was holding a kitchen knife." The courtroom gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. "Liar!" Evelyn screamed, jumping to her feet. "You are a liar, Davina! How much is he paying you?" "Mrs. Sterling, sit down, or I will hold you in contempt," Judge O'Connor shouted. "She's lying!" Evelyn was shaking, tears streaming down her face. "I would never hurt my babies. Silas, tell them. Tell them she's lying." Silas sat motionless, looking down at the table, the picture of a heartbroken father unable to look at his abusive wife. Selena Jenkins pulled Evelyn back into her seat. "Evelyn, stop. You're helping them." "She's lying, Selena." Evelyn sobbed into her hands. Gage let the moment hang in the air. "Thank you, Miss Clark. No further questions." It was a devastating blow, the mention of a weapon, of physical abuse toward a child. It was the nail in the coffin. The judge's suspicion about the bank slip seemed to evaporate in the face of imminent danger to a child. "Cross-examination?" the judge asked, his voice cold toward Evelyn now. Selina Jenkins stood up. She looked defeated. She had no way to prove Davina was lying. It was he said, she said, and Davina was a neutral third party, or so it seemed. Selina walked to the podium. "Miss Clark, you say you saw Mrs. Sterling with a knife?" "Yes." "Did you call the police?" I was too scared. Silas came home and calmed her down." "So you left a 4-year-old child in a house with a woman holding a knife and didn't call 911? "I trusted Silas to handle it," Davina said, rehearsed. "No further questions." It was weak. It wasn't enough. As Davina stepped down, Silas looked at Evelyn. He mouthed 2 words. "Game over." But the game wasn't over. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. Heads turned. The bailiff reached for his belt. A man walked in. He was disheveled, wearing a wrinkled trench coat and carrying a battered leather satchel. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He marched straight down the center aisle, ignoring the bailiff's command to stop. "Your Honor," the man shouted, "I have evidence relevant to this case, evidence that was stolen from me." "Who are you?" Judge O'Connor demanded. "Bailiff, secure this man." "My name is Arthur Pendleton," the man yelled as the bailiff grabbed his arm. "I was the CFO of Sterling Ventures until 3 days ago, and I didn't quit. Silas Sterling fired me because I wouldn't cook the books." Silas's face went white as a sheet. "Let him speak," Evelyn shouted, standing up again. "Order!" The judge banged the gavel. "Mr. Pendleton, you cannot just barge into a courtroom." "I have the ledger," Arthur Pendleton shouted, wrestling with the bailiff. He held up a red notebook. "I have the red ledger. It proves everything. The payoffs, the bribing of the nanny, the offshore accounts." The entire courtroom erupted. Reporters were standing on benches. The jury was whispering frantically. "The nanny!" The judge's voice cut through the noise. He pointed his gavel at the bailiff. "Release him. Bring that notebook here." "Your Honor, this is an ambush!" Gage screamed, his composure finally shattering. "This man is a disgruntled former employee. This is inadmissible." "If it proves perjury by a witness who just testified," Judge O'Connor said, his eyes hard as flint, "then it is very much admissible. Bring me the book." Arthur Pendleton walked to the bench, straightening his coat. He handed the red notebook to the judge. "Turn to page 40, Arthur said, panting. "Look at the entry for Davina Clark." The judge opened the book. The room was so silent you could hear the pages turning. Silas Sterling closed his eyes. The judge read the page. His expression darkened. He looked up at Davina Clark, who was frozen near the exit door, trying to leave. "Bailiff," the judge said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Stop, Miss Clark. She is not to leave this building." He turned his gaze to Silas. "Mr. Sterling," Judge O'Connor said, "it appears there is a ledger entry here dated 2 weeks ago. Davina Clark, testimony payment, $50,000 via Cayman Route B. Would you like to explain why your children's nanny is on your company payroll for $50,000? The twist wasn't just a turn in the road. It was a cliff, and Silas Sterling had just walked right off the edge. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B had shifted from a legal proceeding to a crime scene. The silence that followed Judge O'Connor's question to Silas Sterling was profound, heavy, and suffocating. "Mr. Sterling," the judge repeated, his voice vibrating with suppressed rage. "I asked you a question. Why is there an entry in this ledger detailing a $50,000 payment to the witness who just left this stand?" Silas stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock, the golden boy of Silicon Valley, The man who could talk his way out of SEC audits and board coup attempts was speechless. His eyes darted to Preston Gage, but his lawyer was currently staring at the red ledger in the judge's hand with the look of a man watching a grenade roll under his chair. It's a fabrication," Silas finally managed to choke out. His voice was high, thin. "That man, Pendleton, he's mentally unstable. He's trying to blackmail me. That book is a forgery." "A forgery?" Judge O'Connor raised an eyebrow. He turned the notebook toward the light. "It's bound in Italian leather. It has your initials, SS, embossed on the corner. And the handwriting—" The judge paused, glancing down at the deposit slip he had seized earlier, the one with the Federal Reserve coordinates. He held the two pieces of paper side by side. "The handwriting on the deposit slip matches the handwriting in this ledger perfectly, Mr. Sterling. The unique loop on the Y, the sharp cross on the T. Unless Mr. Pendleton also forged the scrap paper found in your ex-wife's car, paper you claimed was yours, I'd say we have a problem." "Your Honor," Preston Gage stepped forward, holding up a hand. But he wasn't posturing anymore. He was sweating. "I need a moment to confer with my client. I was not made aware of this evidence." "You don't need a moment, Mr. Gage," the judge snapped. "You need a miracle. Bailiff, bring Ms. Clark back to the stand. Immediately." Davina Clark was escorted back into the witness box. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. Her makeup was running, and she was wringing her hands so hard her skin was turning red. "Ms. Clark," Judge O'Connor said. He didn't look at his notes. He looked directly into her soul. "I want to remind you that perjury is a felony. In the state of California, it carries a prison sentence of up to 4 years. Do you understand that?" Davina nodded, a sob escaping her throat. "Yes." "I have here a ledger provided by the former CFO of Sterling Ventures," the judge continued, tapping the red book. "It details a payment to you, $50,000. Now I am going to ask you one time, and one time only. Did you see Evelyn Sterling holding a knife?" Davina looked at Silas. Silas's eyes were wide, pleading, threatening. But then Davina looked at Evelyn. Evelyn wasn't looking at her with anger. She was looking at her with pity. Evelyn, the woman who had bought Davina a plane ticket home when her grandmother died. Evelyn, who had made her soup when she had the flu. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. "No," Davina whispered. The courtroom erupted again, but the judge silenced them with a single, sharp rap of the gavel. "Speak up, Miss Clark," O'Connor commanded. "No," Davina wailed, burying her face in her hands. "There was no knife. She never hurt anyone. He made me say it. He said he'd pay off my student loans. He said if I didn't help him get full custody, he'd make sure I never worked in this town again." "Oh my God," Selena Jenkins whispered, covering her mouth. Evelyn let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for a year. The tears finally came, but they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief. The monster in the corner was finally being seen. Silas sank into his chair. He looked small. The charcoal suit suddenly seemed too big for him. "Let the record show," the judge said, his voice like grinding stones, "that the witness has recanted her testimony regarding the abuse. Ms. Clark, you are to remain in custody pending a perjury charge. Step down." As Davina was led away, weeping, the judge turned his attention back to Arthur Pendleton, the disheveled CFO who was still standing near the bench. "Mr. Pendleton," the judge said, "you claim this ledger proves more than just bribery?" "It proves everything, Your Honor," Arthur said, his voice gaining strength. He pointed a shaking finger at Silas. "Silas Sterling isn't just a bad father. He's a criminal. That ledger contains the records of Project Chimera." "Explain," the judge ordered. Silas was bleeding his own company dry, Arthur explained, turning to the stunned jury. He was moving investor capital into offshore shell companies to hide assets from Mrs. Sterling during the divorce proceedings. He didn't want to split his fortune, so he stole it from himself. He created fake vendors, fake invoices, and routed the money through a complex web of banks. Arthur paused, looking at the judge. And that's where the coordinates come in, Your Honor. The judge picked up the deposit slip again, the one with 40.728, 74,060. The Federal Reserve? Yes, Arthur nodded. Silas was paranoid. He didn't trust digital records for the master keys to his crypto wallets where the stolen money was parked. He wrote the access codes down physically. But he needed a place to do the transfer that wouldn't be flagged by his own internal IT security. Arthur took a breath. On October 14th, 2022, the date on that slip, Silas was in New York. He wasn't at a conference. He was at a meeting right outside the Federal Reserve Bank. He met with a black market broker named Elias Vane to purchase a clean, untraceable server link. He wrote the coordinates down as a reminder of the meeting spot. The grocery list on that paper? It's not groceries. Milk is a code for million. Eggs refers to encrypted. It's his shorthand. The courtroom spun. The complexity of the lie was staggering. Silas hadn't just cheated on his wife. He had constructed an entire alternate reality to destroy her while robbing his own investors. Mr. Gage, the judge said, turning to Silas's lawyer, but Preston Gage was already packing his briefcase. Your Honor, Gage said, his face pale, I must request an immediate recess, and I must inform the court that due to ethical conflicts that have just arisen, I can no longer represent Mr. Sterling. You're quitting? Silas shrieked, grabbing Gage's arm. You can't quit! I pay you! Get your hands off me, Gage hissed, ripping his arm away. I'm not going to jail for you, Silas. You suborned perjury. You committed fraud. You're on your own. Gage walked out. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind him, leaving Silas Sterling alone at the defense table. For the first time in his life, the man who owned everything had absolutely nothing. The recess that followed was not for lunch. It was for the arrival of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Evelyn sat in a small antechamber off the main hallway. Selina Jenkins was with her, holding a cup of lukewarm water. Is it over? Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. The custody case. Selina smiled, a genuine wide smile. Evelyn, the custody case is dead. Silas has no lawyer, his star witness admitted to perjury, and he's about to be arrested for massive financial fraud. You're getting the kids, you're getting the house, you're probably getting the company, or what's left of it. Evelyn didn't care about the company. She just closed her eyes and saw Sophie and Liam's faces. I just want to go home. You will, Selina promised. Back in the courtroom, the scene had transformed. Two men in dark suits, FBI agents, were standing near the bailiff's station. They were speaking in low tones with Judge O'Connor. Silas Sterling was still at the defense table. He hadn't moved. He sat with his head in his hands. He looked like a man who had woken up from a dream to find himself in a nightmare. When the court reconvened, Judge O'Connor didn't waste time with formalities. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, since your counsel has withdrawn, do you wish to make a statement before I issue my ruling on the custody matters? Silas stood up slowly. He looked around the room. He saw the press, hungry for his blood. He saw Arthur Pendleton, looking vindicated. He saw the FBI agents waiting by the door. And then he saw Evelyn. She was sitting tall now. The ghost was gone. In her place was a woman made of steel. Silas's narcissism, the engine that had driven him for 40 years, sputtered and died. He realized with a sickening clarity that he had underestimated her. He thought she was weak because she was kind. He thought she was stupid because she was quiet. Silas started. His voice cracked. I did it for the family. I wanted to protect the assets. You did it for yourself, Evelyn said. She didn't shout it. She didn't scream. She spoke it into the quiet room, and it carried the weight of absolute truth. You destroyed me because you couldn't control me, Evelyn said, looking him in the eye. You made me doubt my own mind. You made our children afraid of their own mother. That wasn't for the family, Silas. That was hate. Silas flinched as if she had slapped him. Judge O'Connor nodded slowly. The court finds that Mr. Sterling has engaged in a systematic campaign of psychological abuse, fraud, and perjury. I am awarding sole legal and physical custody of Sophie and Liam Sterling to Evelyn Sterling, effective immediately. Evelyn let out a sob of pure joy. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am issuing a permanent restraining order against Mr. Sterling. And regarding the financial matters, the judge gestured to the FBI agents, I am remanding Mr. Sterling into federal custody pending charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. The red ledger, along with Exhibit 44, the deposit slip, are to be turned over to the Department of Justice. One of the agents stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Silas Sterling, the agent said, his voice flat. You are under arrest. Silas didn't fight. He held out his wrists. As the cold steel clicked shut, he looked at Evelyn one last time. Evie, he whispered. I'm sorry. Evelyn looked at him. She looked at the man she had once loved, the father of her children, now reduced to a criminal in cuffs. I know, she said softly. But sorry doesn't rewrite the past, Silas. It just explains the ending. The agents led him away. The flashbulbs from the press gallery went off like a strobe light, blinding and chaotic. Click, click, click. The downfall of Silas Sterling was captured in high definition. As the doors closed behind him, the courtroom fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of peace. Judge O'Connor took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked down at Evelyn. Mrs. Sterling, he said, in my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many things. But I have never seen a mother fight with such quiet dignity. He smiled. You may go get your children. Evelyn stood up. She shook Selina's hand, then hugged her. She walked down the aisle, past the reporters who were shouting questions, past the stunned onlookers. She pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped out into the hallway. The air out there was different. It smelled of rain and pavement, not floor wax and fear. She pulled her phone from her purse. It had been turned off for the duration of the trial. She powered it on. The screen lit up with a photo of Sophie and Liam grinning at the beach. She dialed the number for her sister, who was watching the kids. Hello? Her sister answered, breathless. Evie? Did you win? Evelyn walked toward the exit, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. She saw the sunlight streaming through the glass doors of the courthouse entrance. I didn't win, Clara, Evelyn said, a smile spreading across her face. I survived, and I'm coming to get the kids. She stepped out into the sun. 3 months had passed since the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse had closed behind Silas Sterling. In the rolling hills of Sonoma, California, the morning light hit the world differently than it did in the sterile, manicured enclaves of Silicon Valley. Here the sun didn't glare off glass skyscrapers. It filtered through the gnarled branches of ancient oak trees and bathed the vineyards in a soft, golden haze. Evelyn stood on the porch of her new home. It wasn't a mansion. It was a 1920s farmhouse with peeling white paint, a creaky wraparound porch, and a roof that needed patching. To Silas, it would have looked like failure. To Evelyn, it looked like a fortress. She held a ceramic mug of coffee, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. Her hands, once trembling and pale during those weeks in court, were steady now. They were rougher, too, calloused from gardening, stained with potting soil and paint. She had spent the last 90 days scrubbing the feeling of the Sterling estate off her skin. She had traded gala gowns for denim overalls and silence for the chaotic, beautiful noise of a home that was actually lived in. Inside, the house was waking up. She could hear the thud of small feet on hardwood floors. "Mum, Liam hid my sneakers again!" Sophie's voice rang out, clear and loud. "Did not!" Liam yelled back, followed by a giggle. Evelyn smiled. It was a small thing, this noise. But for years the Sterling household had been a place of hushed tones. "Shh! Daddy is on a call. Shh! Don't upset Daddy." Now they could scream, they could laugh, they could just be children. While Evelyn built her new life, the old one was being dismantled, brick by brick, in the public eye. The Red Ledger trial had become a national sensation. Silas Sterling's downfall was absolute. The Department of Justice had been merciless. The forensic accountants had unspooled a web of financial rot that went back 5 years: wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and the bribing of witnesses. Silas was currently residing in the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon. He had been sentenced to 15 years. Stripped of his Italian suits and his power, he was now inmate 89402B. The irony wasn't lost on Evelyn. The man who had spent a fortune trying to control every aspect of his environment was now in a place where he couldn't even choose when to turn off the lights. Evelyn hadn't visited him. She likely never would. She had, however, received a letter from Davina Clark. It had arrived 2 weeks ago, written on cheap-lined paper. Davina had taken a plea deal, 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service in exchange for her testimony against Silas. The letter was stained with tear marks. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It just offered a confession of guilt and a promise that she was trying to become the person Evelyn had once thought she was. Evelyn had read it, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. She didn't have the emotional bandwidth to forgive yet, but she had enough peace to not hate. Hate was a tether, and she had cut all her strings. The gravel driveway crunched under the tires of an approaching car. Evelyn stiffened. The PTSD hadn't vanished completely. It lingered in the small moments, the sudden sound of a car door, the ring of a telephone late at night. Her heart did a quick, frantic gallop before she forced herself to breathe. "You are safe," she reminded herself. The judge's gavel came down. "It's over." A dusty station wagon pulled up. The driver's door opened, and Arthur Pendleton stepped out. He looked different. The frantic, disheveled man who had burst into the courtroom wearing a trench coat like a shield was gone. In his place was a man who looked lighter. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, and he had filled out, the hollows of his cheeks replaced by a healthy flush. He was carrying a cardboard box. "Evelyn?" he called out, shielding his eyes from the sun. "I hope I'm not intruding. Selina gave me the address." Evelyn walked down the porch steps. "Arthur, you're not intruding. It's good to see you." Arthur smiled, a bit shyly. He placed the box on the hood of his car. "I was passing through on my way to Healdsburg. I wanted to bring you these." He opened the box. Inside were 6 bottles of wine, the labels handwritten. "It's the first crush from my own grapes," Arthur explained, looking at his boots. "I'm not a CFO anymore. I bought a small plot of land about 20 miles north of here. I'm a farmer now." Evelyn picked up a bottle. Pendleton Family Vineyards. Truth. Red blend. I figured, Arthur said, his voice turning serious, that after everything that happened, we both deserved something that tasted real. Evelyn looked at him. This man had risked everything to save her. He had blown up his own career, faced federal scrutiny, and walked into a courtroom hostile to his presence, all to hand over a notebook that vindicated a woman he barely knew. Arthur, Evelyn said softly, you didn't have to do this, but I'm glad you did. I did have to, Arthur said, leaning against his car. I watched Silas operate for too long. I saw the way he isolated you at company parties. I saw the bruises on your spirit, even when you hid the ones on your arms. I stayed quiet to keep my paycheck. That silence, it almost ate me alive. When he fired me, it wasn't a punishment. It was a wake-up call. We both stayed quiet for too long, Evelyn agreed. But we're talking now. Is that the Ledger man? Sophie was standing on the porch, squinting at them. She was holding her stuffed rabbit by the ears. Arthur chuckled. I suppose that's going to be my nickname forever. Sophie, this is Mr. Pendleton, Evelyn said, waving her daughter over. He helped Mommy. Remember? Sophie walked down the steps slowly. She studied Arthur with the intense scrutiny only a 7-year-old can muster. She looked at his boots, his kind eyes, and the box of wine. Do you like pizza? Sophie asked abruptly. Arthur blinked. Yes, I love pizza. Good, Sophie decided, because we made too much dough. Mummy says we have to eat it all or the yeast will explode. Evelyn laughed, a genuine bell-like sound that startled the birds in the nearby oak tree. I said the dough would rise too much, Soph, not explode. Same thing, Sophie shrugged. She looked at Arthur. You can stay, but you have to help Liam. He's bad at putting on the pepperoni. Evelyn looked at Arthur. She's right. We have a surplus of dough and a deficit of pepperoni management skills. Would you like to stay? Arthur hesitated, looking at the warm glow of the kitchen window. He had spent the last 3 months alone, rebuilding his life in solitude. The offer of chaos, of noise, of a family dinner felt like a gift he wasn't sure he had earned. I'd be honored, Arthur said. 2 hours later, the kitchen was a disaster zone of flour and tomato sauce. Liam was sitting on the counter, telling Arthur a very complicated, non-linear story about a dinosaur who became a dentist. Arthur was listening with rapt attention, nodding at all the right parts. Evelyn sat at the small kitchen island, sipping a glass of Arthur's wine. It was good, earthy, complex, with a finish that lingered. She watched the scene before her, a stranger, a friend, sitting with her children. No one was walking on eggshells. No one was checking the time. The air in the room felt light, unburdened by the heavy gravity of narcissism that Silas used to project. She thought back to that moment in the courtroom. The judge's question, "Do you know what these numbers represent?" That question had been the key. But the lock had been picked long before that. It had been picked by her resilience, by her refusal to let Silas write the end of her story, by her willingness to endure the silence until the moment was perfect, to break it. Selina Jenkins had called earlier that afternoon to confirm the final legal detail. Evelyn's name change was processed. She was no longer Evelyn Sterling. She was Evelyn Pierce. But as she looked at her children laughing, she realized she was something else, too. She wasn't just a survivor of Silas Sterling. She was the architect of her own peace. Arthur looked over at her, catching her eye. He raised his glass in a silent toast. Evelyn raised hers back. Outside, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, and the crickets began their nightly chorus. It was a loud, vibrant sound. Evelyn walked over to the back door and opened it, letting the cool night air mix with the warmth of the oven. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of pine, earth, and freedom. The drama was over. The silence was gone. And for the first time in 10 years, Evelyn Pierce didn't just have a story, she had a life. She closed the door, locked it, not out of fear, but out of certainty, and turned back to the laughter in the kitchen. And that is the incredible, twisted, and true-to-life story of how Evelyn Pierce brought down an empire with nothing but patience and a single grocery list. It's a reminder that even when the odds are stacked against you, the truth has a way of coming out, sometimes in the form of a disgruntled employee, and sometimes in a simple question from a judge who pays attention. What do you think? Was Silas's punishment enough? Would you have forgiven Davina? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more dramas, mysteries, and justice-served narratives, please hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and remember, silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's full of answers. See you in the next one.